I think we should go ahead and start since it's now 3 p.m. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to mute everybody except Joe and Taylor. And I'll do a quick introduction of both speakers and what they're talking about today. And then if you would like to ask questions, please feel free to write them in the chat and we'll moderate those through the conversation. And then depending on how much time we have, we will see how many questions can be answered. Okay, so I'm just going to mute everybody. Let's see. All right, so let's start. So today we have Joanne Barrow from Nannies by Noah and Taylor Augustine, who will be discussing keeping older children from boredom. Due to stay-at-home orders, teens and tweens that a month ago had a hard time keeping up with all of their activities now find themselves with nowhere to go. They are often disappointed with the fact that they cannot meet up with their friends and engage in other social activities. This webinar will focus on how nannies and parents can help children from 11 through their teens stay active and engaged. There are only so many times you can tell them, go read a book, and that presents a challenge during this time of stay-at-home orders. These ladies have years of experience with caring for and engaging teens and tweens through the ins and outs of life and have unique thoughts on how to do it now. Jo Barrow is the CEO of Nannies by Noah in New York City and has 3 decades of childcare, private service, consulting, and recruiting experience. Jo was voted INA's Nanny of the Year in 2013 and has since served a term on the INA's Board of Directors. She's passionate and committed to providing the highest level of private service throughout her career, and she continued to move forward in the industry by participating in numerous programs and workshops that focus on the development of health and safety of children. When not running the day-by-day operations of Nannies by Noah, she stays busy on the home front as a stepmom of 4 awesome budding teenagers. Taylor Augustine has worked as a nanny and household manager for 17 years, including 10 plus years with the same nanny family. Well done, Taylor. She specializes in working with parents who work from home. She's a graduate of Grinnell College, where she majored in English with a concentration in gender and women's studies. Taylor originally planned to teach high school students. Instead, she moved from the Midwest to Washington, D.C. to take her first living nanny position, working with 2 preschoolers. She developed a passion for working with older kids when she spent 5 summers working at Girl Scout camp, first as a counselor in training and eventually as assistant camp director and CIT coordinator. She also taught outdoor education during a break between nanny positions. She currently lives in Baltimore with her wife and 9 cats, where she spends her time couponing, baking, and camping with friends. Okay, over to you, ladies.
Thank you, Candy.
Thanks, Candy.
Thank you, ladies. Thanks for joining Taylor and I today for this webinar on teen boredom. As Candy said, as a stepmom to 4 teens myself between the ages of 12 and 17, and Taylor's a full-time nanny and house manager to a 13-year-old girl and 17-year-old boy. You know, we're working every day too to help our kids navigate this new normal and all the unknowns and uncertainties of fear and frustration that have come along with it. I am just learning though right now, Taylor, that you have 9 cats. That's unbelievable.
Yeah, don't be surprised if you hear any of them throwing themselves against the door while we're talking. They're just trying to get in here, but no.
I threw mine out. So anyway, we just want to share, you know, our perspectives on what's been working well for us and maybe not what's not been working so well to combat this battle with boredom, and talk about some ways that we can really help relieve some of these kids' struggles while we're still experiencing our own too. You know, the research tells us that there are positive sides to boredom too. So we'll take a bit of a dive into that and see if perhaps we can try and look at it from a beneficial angle as well. It's not all negatives. We also want to hear from you and what you and the teens in your life are struggling with. So we want to encourage you to use the chat bar to ask your questions, and then we'll do our best together, and I'm sure collectively as a group to help you get some answers. I found an interesting study this week. It was polled by dosomething.org, and they've been following Gen Z students aged 13 to 25 throughout this entire pandemic and following their experiences. And a recent one that was taken this month focused on their current mood. And the top 3 results that were shown were that they were frustrated, they were nervous, and that they're feeling disconnected. They were all pretty equal, but most of all, they're bored. And as the weeks are progressing with this pandemic, they seem to be really feeling increasingly restless too. So, you know, for the older teens, I know my 17-year-old son, you know, they're mourning the loss of prom and their school groups, sports and graduation, things like that. You know, these are all rites of passage that they've been looking forward to. And, you know, Netflix and Xbox are really only getting them so far to relieve that boredom. And then our younger teens, they're missing their friends, their routines of schools and their clubs. And, you know, ironically, while they used to look forward to the end of the school day, now they're actually wishing for the day that they can get back to school, even if it's just to see their friends and their teachers. They're missing their teachers too. So one-on-one socialization at this point in their development is really a huge thing. And so, you know, hanging out with their friends on video apps and social media, it is helping them, but only to a degree, right? It seems that boredom isn't necessarily something you can just swipe away in an app. And as adults, some of you might be essential workers yourselves and still leaving the house each day, while others of us are working remotely and therefore possibly still experiencing engagement through conversation with people outside our homes throughout the day. So in that regard, I'd suggest that it's probably likely harder for teens to be isolated than for many adults. You know, because over the years, we've all developed our coping mechanisms, right? Whereas they're still learning theirs. I also suspect it's probably harder for teens in cities who can't even leave their buildings and, you know, take the elevator downstairs, whereas teens in the suburbs and more rural environments like we're in, Taylor and I at least, you know, can at least step outside their front doors and hang out in the backyard. So that's been a reprieve. So we're going to try and touch a little bit on a few topics. You know, we're going to talk about our teens and our own mental health and how we're talking to them about the pandemic, their remote learning, how they're feeling about that, of course, and sharing some activities that we've been using to try and keep their spirits up. And then again, from there, we'd love to open it up to your questions and share the ideas that you found to be working well too. So again, please add any questions as you think of them in the comment panel, and we will do our best to get to all of them. Okay, so let's dig in. So hello, Taylor.
Hi, Joe.
Hi there in Baltimore.
Yes, hello.
So listen, so you have a 13-year-old girl and a 10-year-old boy, right, that you've been with for 10 years now. So clearly you know these kids very well. What have you found to be the biggest challenge so far for them, and how have you been able to support them through this?
Well, I think a lot of it is the same things that you said. They're missing school, they're missing the routines. The kids that I care for in particular have always really liked to be very busy. And so they're finding a lot of struggle in trying to organize their own schedule and figure out what their new weekday routine is going to be. And so from my perspective as the nanny, I've been trying to really help support the parents in maintaining those weekday routines. They are still getting up in the morning. They have a lot of synchronous classes where they're in class with their teachers, usually on Zoom or something similar. And so those periods of time throughout the day are helping keep them on track. I know that not everybody's school system is robust enough to really be able to support that. And so I'll share some of the things that they're doing besides class that are really helping them find things to do throughout the day. So what do your kids say has been the hardest thing for them so far?
I think it's really been the routine aspect of it. You know, I think that's super important in general, and most kids thrive in knowing what's happening next, right? So without that, they can start to feel pretty lost and unmotivated, you know, without that direction. So maintaining their routines without being rigid and while sort of recognizing where to shift gears and loosen the reins a little bit has been a delicate balance for us. We've been trying to stick to some foundational routines, like making sure we're eating together at regular times and maintaining bedtime and morning routines, for example. So we use the weekend to sort of shift gear the most, I guess, so that there's a different feel to the weekdays as much as possible, and there's some separation. One of our twins, Katie, said the other day, she's like, every day is Groundhog Day. I don't know if it's Tuesday or if it's Saturday. So, it became pretty obvious we needed to find ways to separate the weekend and the weekdays. And doing that's been helpful for them, I think. Loss of control is another thing that's been challenging, especially for my son. We've been trying to create opportunities to offer them choices wherever we can. Kids always like choice, and even as they get older, it's still important. So even simple little things like, taking turns, who's going to choose the next board game, or what to make for dinner, or when they can take their study breaks. Even small choices are having a big impact on giving them back that sense of control over their days. And then again, for my son, a lot of this sort of steers to him. He's a little bit older, and I feel like he's feeling it a little bit more, but just lots of newfound freedom. For him, he recently got his driving license and his first car. It's very exciting stuff, of course. And he was loving the freedom that gave him. And then suddenly, within a month, that was gone. And he'd also joined a gym that he was going to 5 days a week and was super excited and motivated about that. But now, the gym's closed, there's nowhere to go. So he put his own sort of spin on it. And now he takes drives with his dad as an outlet. They don't get out of the car, they just go for a drive. And it gives them a chance to just, chat and have their boy time, and gives him a little bit of a reprieve from having 3 younger sisters at home in the house, which isn't easy. Just provides him that bit of space and separation. So, in general, I think we found it a good time to try and find moments for one-on-one activities with them. And on a typical day, a typical week, when there's 4 kids, it's really tough to carve out time for that. So just trying to sort of be appreciative and grateful of having that time now.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I've enjoyed most with my nanny kids, because we typically spend most of our time together in the car. And so there's lots of really easy moments where we're not face to face because they're next to me or they're behind me in the car, to find those times to connect and find those ways to have some of the more difficult conversations. It's harder to do that when we're sitting face to face at the lunch table, but I'm still trying to make sure that we do that. We all of us in the house, the parents, me, the kids, we've all decided to sort of take our lunch break together. We eat leftovers, or we figure out what we're going to eat. And, teaching the kids how to make grilled cheese or make their own lunch has been really nice, because they're so used to getting it served to them at school, and they don't typically have time for that. So trying really hard to connect and to really talk about what our days are like, because everybody spends most of the day in their own part of the house, because they have a big enough house where they can do that. And not every kid has that chance.
Right. And what about you sort of personally as a nanny? I'm sure there's been some changes for you now with parents in the home. I mean, what new challenges have presented there for you in your role?
Yeah, absolutely. I typically have at least one parent at home most of the time, because they work from home at least part of the time. That's been my experience as a nanny the whole time, that I've always had at least one parent at home. I know that's a big change for a lot of nannies, but I do really appreciate the opportunity to communicate with them on a regular basis. We have plenty of time to talk about all kinds of things that come up, either with the kids or my schedule or whatever. But right now I'm doing a lot of things that are not a typical part of my job. Even though I'm a household manager, I'm not usually the one that's cleaning the kitchen or wiping down all the doorknobs and light switches. But right now that's something that's needed of me to do, and I'm stepping up and doing it. But I'm trying to do it in such a way that it doesn't become an expectation in my job after this is over, and making sure that it doesn't become something that I become resentful about. Like I have to step back and think, this is something that really helps the parents right now. It's something that we all need to do. It protects the kids. It protects me by wiping all those surfaces down and keeping us from getting sick. So it requires a lot of patience and a lot of extra communication, which I'm sure many of you are experiencing if you haven't had parents at home before.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah, and so we were talking a little bit about routine. Are there milestones or important events that your kids particularly have missed, other than not having a chance to drive as much in his own car as he wanted?
Yeah, we've had some pretty significant events in the last month. We've had 3 birthdays in our house in a month. Our twins turned 14 and our son turned 17. They had their first concert at Madison Square Garden that they were so excited about for so long, and that got canceled. And we were going to have dinner at their favorite Japanese restaurant, and that got cancelled. And so it was hard, you know. Birthdays are a big deal at that age, and you know, we could really only promise that we'd at least try to reschedule them when things opened up. And they were sad, you know, of course they were, and it was important for us to validate those. Shouldn't feel lost, because they should understand that it's sort of beyond our control. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, something happened, but she fixed it. Thanks, Candy.
Oh, okay, I'm unmuted. So they're disappointed about that. And, you know, we wanted to validate their feelings, but on the same hand, we needed to keep our own disappointment for them in check, you know, because I think if we're overly devastated for their losses, we're really just going to exacerbate that disappointment for them by feeling the weight of ours. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, we listened, we empathized, and then we planned a fancy dinner party. And at home, you know, we had a family game night, and of course they chose everything from the food to the music to the board games we played, and it was a good time. So, you know, when you got lemons, you got to make lemonade, right? But as far as the impact of the social loss, we're definitely encouraging them to stay connected with their friends on social media. Our son's found some pretty fun online games to play with his friends. Our girls are using House Party, which is an app that allows about 8 friends to interact at once and play virtual games together. So they've loved that. But on the flip side, you know, I've always found and believed that there is value in boredom. So, you know, if you take your cues from your younger kids, if you've got younger nanny kids or younger children, you know that they hate time out, right? Because it's so boring. But have you ever noticed when you give them that chance to clear their mind and just daydream for a bit, they'll actually figure out some way to entertain themselves while they're sitting on that step. Even if it's just, you know, playing with a button on their shirt, it can become the most fascinating thing in the world, and they'll get lost. So an example of that, I guess I could say, is, like I said, our son's really missing the gym. So he's been getting into weightlifting lately, and he's even gotten himself to a competitive point in a very brief time, and was really missing those workouts. But given the option of doing yard work with his dad or finding, you know, a solution, it actually led him to be pretty resourceful, and he took the initiative to build his own weights. He built himself a set of barbells out of a steel pole that he found in the garage, and cinder blocks, and he was really proud of himself. So, you know, that opportunity to feel boredom led him to get creative in a way that he might not ordinarily have done. So, you know, I'm not opposed to more time on social media, because, you know, I think they need to have those social connections, but we're also trying to find windows to unplug from those distractions and give them a little time and space to get bored and see where it takes them. I think, you know, allowing their minds some time and space will open up some creativity. And plus, we're fortunate. We've got 4 kids, so they still largely entertain each other. And I suspect it's much, much harder on teens that are singles right now.
Yeah. My younger nanny kid is 13. She'll be 14 in June. And she has always struggled since she was a toddler with spending time independently and figuring out what she wants to do on her own. And she's come up with some really great, you know, she's really been reading a lot, but she also really wanted to read Little Women with me, and she didn't think we would have time, but now we do. And just the fact that a 13-year-old wants me to read out loud to her is pretty amazing. But connecting over the book and talking about it, and she saw the movie. I haven't yet, so we'll probably do that at the end of the book. But it's amazing that the little bit of time that they have that's free, that they don't normally have, they're really enjoying the break, the chance to relax, the chance to, you know, they pulled out things in the house that they haven't used in years. I came in one Monday morning and they had built a Capitol building out of a Lego set that had been sitting in the closet for probably 5 years. So, you know, this is a great chance to pull those things out and to be glad that maybe your nanny family didn't clear out all the toys as soon as they outgrew them, because things come back around and they take that chance to really do something that they weren't expecting.
Yeah.
And some of the kids are going to need more guidance from us on that, but, you know, and I asked my nanny kids what apps they're really using, and they mentioned House Party, but they also mentioned something called, I wanted to bring up a couple that they brought up because they sounded pretty cool and they've used them with their friends. One is called Scribble, skribbl.io, and it's an app where you can basically play like Pictionary with a group of friends. And so I thought that was really fun, and I haven't used it, so I don't know whether they're, what kind of, what the platform is really like, but it was something that the younger kid just went on and on to me about. And then the other one is one called Psych. It's an app that you can use. I don't know if it's available on Android, but it's definitely available on Apple devices. And it's sort of like 20 questions, I guess was how she described it. So maybe somebody's used it, I don't know. But just a couple of things that especially if you have slightly younger kids that are maybe 10, 12, 13, that are needing a little bit more guidance and structure, and are having a harder time connecting with their friends because maybe they're not in that period of time yet where they really talk on the phone or they really FaceTime yet. And maybe they haven't had a chance to use a lot of these platforms much because they've been sort of restricted because they're younger. This might be the time to open up some of those things and check out the apps yourself, check them out, bring them up to your nanny families, see if that might be a possibility. And maybe even it's just that, they play them with their cousins or their grandparents or somebody that isn't part of their household. But it's just, I think there's a lot of really great apps out there. So I want to share a couple that I've heard of.
Awesome. Yeah. What was the first one? Scribio?
Scribble, SKRIBBLL.io.
Scribble. Okay. Yeah. Terrific. I'm going to check that out myself. So, talking about structure and routines, are you maintaining your routines? I mean, what's changed? Are you loosening up the reins anywhere?
They have to get up and be, at school at certain times. So they're getting up, they're making themselves breakfast, which is something they don't always have time to do when school is in session. So they're getting to make some pretty good omelets. It's great. But they're also, they're getting up, they're doing school, but then school is sort of over by 1 p.m. and they have all this time. And so from that perspective, they're having more time to do other things. They've been really, really great about taking the initiative to get themselves outside every day. And like you said, Joe, they have that opportunity because they are in a suburban setting with lots of green space. They have a trail behind their house and they have a park right across the street. Not that the playground's open, but just that green space is there where they can throw a ball around or whatever. So yeah, we're sticking pretty well to the routines, and I'm really trying to help support the parents in what they want, which is to maintain as much of those routines as possible, because the older kid is in high school, it's getting ready for those college applications. And for these parents, that's really important. I'm sure many of you have that same pressure from your nanny parents for those kids. So for us, the routine is sort of there. And I'm sort of finding that it reminds me a lot of when they were toddlers and we had that, eat, play, sleep routine. Well, now it's like study, play, outside time, and they're sort of rotating through those options. I just think it's funny they've come up with that same sort of structure for themselves that we put into place when they were younger. Yeah,
it's funny. They've reverted in a lot of ways. We, schools definitely remained a priority for us. I think that's important. Our kids are super fortunate that their school district's done a really wonderful job in setting up their online learning. They get about an average of 4 hours a day. And they have to be up, dressed, fed, and signed in for attendance by 9. And they take breaks, of course. They have lunch. We let them try to structure that around times that they feel they need it. And they know too, that others aren't so fortunate. And we talk about that. There are a lot of kids out there right now that don't have access to Wi-Fi and laptops, or parents that are around and able to support them in their learning. So we talk a lot about those stories and try and really reinforce gratitude around the fact that while our education isn't what it was, we're lucky to have what we have. So, school is definitely a stable routine Monday through Friday. But then again, on the weekends, we've definitely had some PJ days where we've all played hooky, including me and my husband. We haven't cooked or we haven't done laundry. We've ordered in pizza and we've binge watched American Idol, which we're all big fans of. But it's fun, that's when we play board games. That's when we experiment in the kitchen. And, again, creating that separation so there's something to look forward to on the weekend's been great. And then during the week, there's been a little wiggle on bedtime and wake up for sure. A couple of hours either side, but really maintaining those 10 hours of rest per night, I think, is super important. The kids have struggled a little bit with getting to sleep the way they used to. So, just having that 30 minutes of reading time before lights out, turning off phones and trying to limit distractions before going to sleep has been helpful too.
Mhm.
you know. And so there, what about just in general, just talking about the pandemic? Are your kids asking you a lot of questions? I mean, how much information do you think it is important to share? How much is too much?
Well, I've noticed that the older kid who's 17 is able to really process the information in a scientific way because he's taken those high school science classes, so he understands it. His little sister gets a lot more anxious about the future and a lot more concerned about, well, what if this is still happening in 6 months? What happens if it's still Christmas time? And we're trying to pull her back and let her think about this week and this month, because none of us know what's going to happen in 3 months or 6 months. And
Mm.
from that perspective too, I'm trying to just follow what the parents want. I've been there a long time, so they know, they trust my judgment on what I'm sharing. But I found it just really important to sort of help them figure out what are good sources of information online. They haven't really noticed a whole lot of, I haven't noticed a whole lot of them finding a lot of misinformation. But is that something that your kids have really been dealing with? Have you been noticing that they've had this bombardment of ideas from social media that are maybe not completely true, or that you've had to sort of untangle that for them?
Not so much. I mean, they're all pretty savvy, but like all of us, we can all get suckered into a scam, right? And one thing, and I agreed with my son. When I looked at it, it looked really convincing. He said they've discovered a vaccine and it's going to be available for purchase online, and then there's these home testing kits, and all you need to do is put your saliva on a Q-tip and you mail it in, and they send you the results. And we were like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Let's take a look at this together. And obviously, we found that what he was reading wasn't entirely accurate, but it's still very convincing. So there certainly are misconceptions and misinformation out there, and I think it's important for that reason to really keep talking, keep asking them questions. I think just because they may have been fine last week doesn't mean they're fine today. My emotions are changing on a daily basis, so no doubt theirs are too. I think it's about the subject and how you ask a teenager a question if you really want to get a response. We all know that if we say, "How was online learning today?" It's quite possible you get that deer in the headlight stare and fine, and nothing beyond that. But if you try and reframe the questions and ask about things that they're really interested in, their hobbies, celebrities, public figures, just find out what they're interested in, ask them, and they'll talk. But one thing I know with our kids is they always know when we're trying too hard. So it's important to try and be subtle and be realistic too about lengthy conversations right now. Recognize when they zone out, because at that point you're only talking to yourself anyway. But we've to keep conversations going, we've had a couple of things that have worked really well that I can share with you. One thing we played, and it stemmed as a result of these stories we were hearing online, is we call it fact or fiction, right? And we go around the table and everyone has to give 2 examples of things they've heard that are related to the pandemic somehow. And the objective is for the other people around the table to decide whether that's true, whether it's false, or whether it's just simply a rumor. And it's really opened up some interesting conversations, and it's been good practice for their debating skills, which is something they all started in school this year. And then, of course, ultimately, we need to dig in and find out what the truth is, but that's been good for conversation. We've also really tried to limit TV news exposure. I think that can be too much. It's tempting to check in and see what the latest numbers look like, but it can be pretty scary for young kids, to see that. So we're just reminding them how and where to get accurate news and information, working together to do fact checking, and just really encouraging them to keep asking questions when they're curious. Just keep yourself accessible to them. Set up a specific time. If you're working and you don't have as much time to interact throughout the day, make sure you do make some space for that. And ask your kids, how can I support you through this? What do you need from me? I think we just need to keep validating their feelings as they're having them. Try not to solve everything for them. We can't. We also don't need to fill every second of their days. It's okay to be quiet and just spend some time alone too. Just keep showing compassion, validate what they're feeling, and try to be present for them. That's my thought on that.
Yeah, I agree.
But, you know, for you and I, like we talked about it, you live in Baltimore, right? But you work in DC. Your family's home has a backyard. We have one too. You know, I do wonder for kids in city environments what this is like for them, because those 5 minutes of fresh air we get every day are making all the difference. Do you have any ideas for what teens in, you know, urban environments can really do, or what they're doing and how they're feeling? Any thoughts on that?
Well, I asked my friend that lives in Brooklyn. She has a 9-year-old daughter, and she has in her building a courtyard, but it's basically a concrete block that all of their balconies overlook, and that's not really super helpful, especially since it used to be the place where all the parents would send the kids down to play together, and they can't really do that right now. So she said that even though the closest green space for them is a mile away, she and her daughter are making an effort to make it there as many days a week as they can. So I think it's maybe not very helpful, but just it might be worth, as the weather gets warmer and the, you know, if this stretches on, to make that time, even if it's not the most convenient thing. Especially if you're there as the nanny and the parents are working, maybe you're the one that gets the kids out and, you know, take a walk, go kick a soccer ball around in the patch of grass down the street, whatever you've got. Because I think I agree with you that outdoor time, and they really crave it. They've been sitting in front of a computer for 4 hours, and, you know, let's go play ping pong, and then let's go take a walk outside or get on our bikes. And they do that themselves because they really like the activity and they really like the fresh air.
Yeah, sure. It's a tough one though. I'd love to hear any thoughts anyone's gotten about what they've been doing if they're in a city, with their kids. What about, Taylor, you know, any advice you can give for full charge nannies like yourself that are working with stay-at-home parents for the first time right now?
Sure, and I know that INA has a webinar tomorrow specifically about this, so I'll just touch on it.
Yeah.
But for me, doing this for basically my entire nanny career, the things that I've really learned is that I know as nannies, sometimes we have a tendency to shy away from difficult conversations and to put ourselves last when we communicate. And if you have your nanny parents around all day, it's really great practice to use that time to communicate about everything. Because then the next time you do have to have a difficult conversation, and I think that there are some of us who already have had to do that with this pandemic and will continue to do so as things change over the next weeks and months, to just, you know, get in the habit of checking in with each other every day, because you have that chance to do it while you're not walking out the door at the end of the day, or they're not walking out the door in the morning on the way to work. So, you know, find a time, put it in their schedule, put it in your calendar, do whatever you need to do, but find that time to communicate with them about every day. You know, here's what we're having for dinner. Here's what the kids are, you know, the kids are going to go out for a walk now. I'm going to go to the grocery store now, whatever it is, because the more you talk, the easier it gets to communicate with them when the conversations get tough. That's the thing that I've learned. And you also have to stand up for yourself, because like I said, there's a lot of job creep in this pandemic, because we're being asked to do reasonable things that are outside the normal scopes of our jobs, but we have to make it clear that this is a temporary part of our job, that we're not agreeing to do this for the rest of the time we're employed by that family. And, you know, you also have to be honest with them to some extent about how you're doing. If you're really concerned about your own health and well-being, if there's something you're facing outside of work that's contributing to your inability to do your job, it might be worth it to just come clean a little bit, because everybody's struggling right now. Everybody's job has changed from the way that it was 6 weeks ago. Their job, our jobs, everything. The kids are in a different place. We're in a different place. You know, it's really important to keep those lines of communication open and to be as honest as you can. You don't need to tell them everything about your life, but if you're worried about a relative of yours that's in the hospital, or you're worried because your partner is also an essential worker and they're going out, you know, they're an EMT, they work at a grocery store, whatever it is. If they're going out and you're concerned about your exposure, anything, you just have to be willing to say it and to bring it up, because we're the only advocates we have. There is no HR department for us. So I think that's really my strongest piece of advice there.
Yeah, that's very true, very true. Is there anything that your kids have taken an opportunity to teach you through this?
Well, I'm on Zoom thanks to the 13-year-old. You know, I have this webinar. Will you show me how to use it? And she did. You know, she knows how to use it. She's been doing it for class every day for the last 4 or 5 weeks. So she was able to really teach me how to use this. And she gave me some great tips. Make sure you're full screen, make sure they can hear you, Never
Yeah.
used this platform before. So it was great. Yeah. How about your kids?
It's so funny because every day they come home with some new app or something. For the most part, truly, I mean, there's just not time to go through it all and decipher it all, but they've been going on and on about TikTok. So, I had one of them show me how to use that, and I'm not a huge fan of it. I got to say, I don't get the appeal, but they love it, and they got a real kick out of showing me. And then, of course, my younger ones we have a family house party group now, which is fun. And then my son, I use Instagram for work, but I haven't been using it. So it's been dormant, and he got me to kind of reactivate that and take it up a notch. So I think they've had a lot of fun teaching me some new tricks like that,
Yeah, it's a great way to build confidence in this time where everything's uncertain. They
Yes.
recognize that there are things that they still know how to do that can remain a constant in their lives.
Yeah, and I feel much better now being a little bit more in tune with some of the things they're doing. So it's great. And what about just, in general, keeping that conversation going? Some kids, some teens are really open and easy to talk to. Others are a little bit more reserved. So what have you done to keep conversations going in your house?
Like I said, we eat lunch together, all together every day. And I think that's been really helpful because it gives us all a chance to step away from whatever it is that we're normally doing and together. I also, we have a text thread that all of us sort of communicate on. And, my very sweet 13-year-old texted me last night. She's like, "You're going to do great tomorrow. Let me know how it goes." And those little moments where she can text me something that maybe she doesn't want to say to my face, sometimes that's helpful. So if you're open to letting your teens communicate with you outside of work a little bit, it becomes really handy in these situations.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
One thing I've always thought is kids love talking about their dreams. Have you ever just said, so I had this dream last night, and they all chime in and their hands are going up. Oh, me too. I dreamt this, I dreamt that. So that's a great way to start the day at breakfast. We got Anna, our youngest, a dream dictionary for Christmas. And so, she takes a lot of pleasure in deciphering everyone's dreams in the morning at breakfast. And they'll all talk till the cows come home about that one. Another one, we've always kind of done this anyway, but it's become a little bit more meaningful now is, high, low, high. They have to find, tell us about a high point of their day, a low point of their day, and then end on a high note. So that's always a really good one. Something they did this week, which was funny, was, teens use all these terms and phrases that for the most part, go over my husband and I's head. So we said to him, why don't you write them all down? All these, common phrases and words that you're using these days, and let's see if Dad and I can figure out what you're talking about. And we had done this a couple of years ago at APNA, and as like an icebreaker for the group, and it was a lot of fun, and it was just as much fun doing it at home with our kids. And of course, they get a hoot out of you making a fool of yourself, so they really enjoyed that one. And then, just little things. There's so many simple things. You can if you just Google conversation starters for teens, a huge list is going to come up. Have everybody write them down on pieces of paper, throw them in a hat, take turns picking them out. And before you know it, you'll have nonstop conversation going around the table. Who's your best friend? What's your favorite memory? What's your most embarrassing moment? There's just a bajillion things to talk about. And they love being engaged with adults. They really do enjoy it. So it's just a matter of getting it started. And I told Taylor this earlier this week, but I'm not big on candy, which means it has huge leverage when I break it out. So I award participation in conversations by throwing Starburst around the table and jelly beans, and it works really well.
All right, so maybe we should shift to talking about the second part of this is about activities. I think we're running a little short on time, but I think we can go over some of the activities that we've come up with or that the kids have come up with that really work well. Just to throw some ideas out there. Some of them your kids may already do, but some of them maybe are new ideas. So
go for it, Taylor. Get things started.
Okay, so some of the ones that really have come, and some of these are things they didn't start doing just because of the pandemic, but I just thought I would make a list of things that they enjoy doing because they might be different. So they really like putting together puzzles as a family, and they have, luckily in their house, a space where they can set up a puzzle and it stays set up and it's not a problem. But they pulled out all these 1,000-piece puzzles and they've been putting them together. And then, whenever somebody walks by, you put in a piece and then it slowly gets put together. And it's a great study break, and it's a great way to sort of participate. And that also lends itself to conversation because you're looking at the pieces, you're not looking at each other. And sometimes that lack of eye contact opens the doors a little bit, I think. They also enjoy a lot of big group games like Ticket to Ride or Settlers of Catan, or they love Phase 10, they love Scrabble. So, whatever games like that you might have. I brought some games from my house to share with them that now just live at their house until I leave this position, because they like to play games a lot more than my wife. So it works out really well. They've also started, they also write letters to their relatives because they have relatives that live out of the country. So they write letters to them. That's something that would be a great thing to do at this time, to keep the post office running and just to keep communication with the relatives that live far away. I know it's really easy to do it with an app, or, it's easy to do it with WhatsApp or FaceTime or whatever, but just the act of writing a letter really forces you to kind of focus and put your thoughts together. One of the kids also self-published a book a couple of years ago, and there's a really great way to do it through Amazon, or at least there was at the time. So if that's something that, I don't know, many of you may have heard of NaNoWriMo, which is National Novel Writing Month. It's usually in November, but if we hit June and all of the summer activities are closed, it might be a good time to, if you have a kid that's really into writing, to encourage them to use that framework. And I'm sure if you Google it, you can find the sort of framework that writers and teachers use during that month in November, but it might be a good activity for June, and where they can publish and edit whatever they have at the end of the month. She really enjoyed that, and she was able to pass it out to friends and give a copy to her teacher, and it was really great.
Yeah, it's lovely.
She's also taking an online coding class, which is something that she's been doing for a while, but she found, I think it's called Coder Kids. And I think my understanding of the format from what I've seen her doing is that she's working on coding, and there's some instructor that's overseeing a bunch of kids that are at their own house coding. So it might be something better if the kids have some experience with coding, because my understanding is it isn't so much instruction, but that could be because of the level she's at. There may be a beginner level that's a little bit more one-on-one. And I know that's something a lot of parents would really enjoy. So that might be an idea to throw out there. I've seen kids do drawing lessons from YouTube videos. That would work really well with younger kids too, if you have a 10 or a 12-year-old. Or even an 8 or a 9-year-old that is really, can focus and would follow the directions, and you can go back and watch the video again. So it might be a good way to fill some of that time. And I know that, Joe, you talked about this too, and we can talk about this, is that this is a great chance to teach those life skills that maybe your nanny family has been a little behind on. We're finally teaching the kids to do their own laundry, which is great, and because they now have time to do it. So it's something that, laundry, cooking, gardening. They've always gardened, but this year they started the plants from seeds, which in most of the country, it's probably not too warm to do that. In DC, it's getting to be. So they're able to put the plants outside now, which I know in some parts of the country isn't happening yet.
Yeah.
And another really great idea, this actually came from the elementary school of the kids' private school. The elementary school librarian reached out and said, hey, could some of the middle school and high school kids read books, record themselves reading a book, and we'll give it to the elementary school teachers and they can play the books. And they had specific books that they wanted. And so they had the kids look through the books that they have. And if you had this book, then you read that book and it gets passed along. But I thought that this would be a great idea for anyone. You can read a book out loud. You can send it along to a younger cousin or a friend in the neighborhood, or maybe connect with an elementary school that might be in the neighborhood, whether it's the one the kids went to or not. There might be teachers that would love that, or a preschool class that maybe is not in session right now. So I'm not sure exactly how the teachers or the librarian is planning to do it, but I'm sure you could record yourself using some sort of an app or phone or an iPad, something like that. And I think that was really great, especially if you have some older kids that maybe are reluctant readers or a little shy. Knowing that they're just reading to a camera and they can start over again if they screw up, it's a good idea.
It's great.
Another one that I've seen kicking around a lot is to journal, to keep track of this experience, because this is, we keep hearing it, but unprecedented. And I keep telling the kids that you're going to remember this year for the rest of your life. And so whether they're writing it by hand, whether they're writing it online somehow, or whether they're just taking pictures when they go for a walk every day of the empty streets and the empty paths and the empty playgrounds. Those are the kinds of things that they have the chance to really capture and record and save and turn into something. So
brilliant. Great ideas. We and mine are really quite similar to that, truthfully. I mean, we planted vegetables in the garden. They started them from seeds, and now we've got tomatoes and spring onions and potatoes in the ground. So that's great. We've done a lot of sorting and organizing and like purging, which I personally love. I'm one of those weird people that gets a lot of satisfaction out of organizing. So taking some time to do that. Kids are cooking. They're getting in the kitchen, which is wonderful. They're doing dishes, which is even better. My son ironed his first dress shirt, not because he had anywhere to wear it, because it was just time to learn. They're cutting the lawn, they've washed the cars. They're just taking a great sense of pride in everyday tasks and contributing to the household. So it's a lot of fun to see. Yeah. So I think we're about 45 minutes in, which is kind of long. Do we have any questions, Candy, that we can maybe open up and answer for anyone?
We have questions and we have comments.
Okay.
So I'll start in order. Krista said she used House Party with her mum and friends, and it's great because you don't have to schedule a time to get together, but you still can. And when one person enters, you can see on your phone that you've got a video chat if you want to. And there's a question from Rimmer. She said, my daughter is very social and is motivated by being in the spotlight. The fact that she's not going to school is a major problem. Does anyone have that problem?
Go ahead, Taylor.
Yeah, I mean, my 13-year-old has definitely had some tears because she really loves school and she really misses it. And I think, you're probably doing a good job of acknowledging that with her and sitting with her with it and helping her through that. It's hard. It is hard because that routine is gone, but those connections to the classmates and the teacher are also gone. And so it's important, I think, for all of us to remember that as adults in these kids' lives, whether we're the parent or the nanny, or even if, you have nieces and nephews, that being able to be that constant in the life and trying to find a way to put her in the spotlight. Maybe there's a way for her to create videos and share them with your friends and family, that are starring your daughter's name. And, I'm sure she would have fun learning how to use a camera or video editing or whatever it is that she would need to do that. I'm not that tech savvy, so I don't know, but I know that there are apps about that too. So I would look into that. And I'm really sorry that she's going through that. I know it's hard.
Maybe break out a karaoke machine if you've got one and let her take center stage in the kitchen. That might help.
Sheila shared her situation and she says, I was stressed because I had exchange kids aged 16 and 18 living in my home when this all started, and they had to go back home due to COVID-19. I shared this with my employer and lost work because they misunderstood that they had lived with me since August and were healthy and headed back to their countries. They thought the kids had just arrived and I was a COVID threat. She also shared, however, that when she did have her exchange students, they had to spend time together in shelter. They did puzzles, they watched movies or shows that highlighted their cultures. They did cooking, made art, decorated Easter eggs, shared music styles. They went on walks, did yoga, and they were having a home prom. And then we have another comment from Krista. She says, we did a quarantine photo scavenger hunt last week. Things like finding an empty park, people wearing face masks, people social distancing, etc. And then Catherine shared that she has a great karaoke app for teens and she's happy to share it.
Oh, great. Yeah, I would love to hear that. It sounds like it would help lots of kids.
Certainly, yeah.
All right, and that's all we have at the moment.
Okay. Well, if anybody has questions that come to them later or just wants to talk something through, we're here, we're all ears. I think Candy's going to put up our email addresses.
I'm doing that right now.
Thank you, Candy. So please feel free to reach out, and happy to chat with anyone about anything, and would love to hear about that karaoke app, please. So let us know what it's called.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say to Sheila that I'm sorry that that your nanny family interpreted your situation that way, and I hope that that you were able to find some relief from that situation, whether it was the new nanny relief fund or unemployment insurance or finding another temporary position or whatever it was. I'm so sorry that that happened to you. I know that's a tough place to be in, especially when it wasn't the situation that they thought it was.
Indeed. So any final thoughts, Taylor, before we close?
Well, thanks everybody for joining us today. This was our first webinar, so hopefully we were able to share some information that was helpful to everybody. And I wanted to reiterate what I was saying earlier to Rima, that we have the chance to be that constant person in the lives of these teens and older kids whose lives have been really disrupted by everything. I mean, this is a tough time to be in social isolation during those teenage years, where those social connections are so important. So I hope that you all find ways to connect with your own community of nannies and other parents, whatever situation you're in, to give yourselves the strength to be that person, because I know it's tough for everybody right now, and it's tough on the kids. And so we all have a really special role to play in the lives of these kids. And I hope that we are all able to continue to be there for them.
Well said. Well said. Okay. Well, thank you, ladies. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Afternoons. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much for the webinar and for sharing your experiences with us.
You bet. Take care.
And thank you all for participating.
Yes, be well, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Stay safe.